Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are right now. I'm Evgenia from Roundhill Ventures, and I would like to welcome you to our PropTech Connect Construction and Sustainability virtual event. As you might know, PropTech Connect is a forum that connects Europe's real estate ecosystem, investors, entrepreneurs, corporate players, and the public sector to discuss industry's trends and challenges. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. We will have about an hour of panel discussion and then Q&A session with the audience. So please do not hesitate to share your questions along the way in the Q&A section of Zoom, and I will make sure we cover it before the end of the session. The advantage of having this session online is that we have speakers and the audience dialing in from all over the world. Today, we have an amazing panel of speakers who will share their views on the role of technology and sustainability in the construction life cycle. Thank you so much for joining us today. So could you please briefly introduce yourself, maybe starting with Kristofer?
Hello everyone, thanks for having me. My name is Kristofer Fichtner. I'm a serial entrepreneur and investor. I'm based in Berlin. I've founded 4 companies so far. 2 of them are in the clean tech space. And the latest one, called ecoworks, is about refurbishing old, usually multi-family home buildings to a net zero energy standard using prefabricated facade and insulation and technology elements. I'm also an LP and venture partner at PropTech One, and I've done about 10 direct venture investments myself. And privately, I have a very strong commitment to climate action. And my wife and I are currently working on a community housing project that's net zero in Brandenburg.
Great, thank you so much. Maybe Lorna, you would like to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Evgenia. So I'm Lorna Walker. I'm co-founder of a business called Modomo. We're a housing pioneer backed by Roundhill Capital. And what we're trying to do is tackle the housing crisis in a sustainable way. And so for us, we're doing that through providing meanwhile housing. And when we say meanwhile housing, what we mean is we lease land rather than buy it. So we lease land that's waiting for permanent redevelopment. And on that land, we create beautiful buzzing places for people to live. So we're unlocking land in that development cycle. And we are doing that using a modular system. So it's modular construction and our homes are fully relocatable. So when our lease comes to an end, we can take them on to reinvigorate a new city space. So in terms of what we're doing and today's topic, it's very much aligned to circular economy principles, trying to make it as sustainable as we can in the first place, but then that circular economy really comes into play. That's something that I'm very passionate about. I'm also a trustee of the UK Green Building Council.
Great, thank you for that. Cohen, would you like to go next?
Thank you. I am the founder of a company called OVG Real Estate that later on went into Edge Technologies. We are a developer of commercial real estate since more than 20 years. And 5 years ago, developed a building called the Edge, which became a little bit of a metaphor for a new generation of smart office buildings. At that time, that building was also one of the most sustainable office buildings in the world. And currently, we are driving that into many new countries. We're active in Germany, the Netherlands, North America, London. Started a second company called Edge Next, which is purely looking at the digitalization of buildings, and where we have sensor packages that go into mainly existing buildings, where we can see the health, the sustainability, and the occupancy of buildings. I'm very interested in investing quite a lot in all kinds of new startups, and also committed to the new venture fund called 2150.
Great, thank you. Jeremy, would you like to introduce?
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. I'm Jeremy Brown. I'm an investor at Fundamental based in Berlin. We're a construction tech venture capital fund focused exclusively on construction. We are headquartered in Berlin, but we invest globally across North America, Europe, Asia Pacific at the early stage. So that's seed, Series A, Series B. Very keen on any startup that's going after orchestration of construction, and we get very excited around we call them sort of digital assets. 3 core ones: intelligence, protocols, fulfillment. So any company startup taking control, market power in the direction of one of those three assets gets us pretty excited. And to date, we have 25 portfolio companies across those three regions. Looking forward to the panel.
Exciting. Philip, would you like to go next?
Yes, sure. I used to be one of those McKinsey guys, then turned serial entrepreneur, built several companies in the digital space. And then in 2012, I turned to the public side. So I'm now CEO of a company owned by the city of Berlin that's responsible for converting the now closed airport of Tegel into a hub for future technologies. So it's a 5 square kilometer area. One part is kind of a platform, what we call the Urban Tech Republic for future technologies, as I've just mentioned. And the other part is a residential district with about 6,000 homes that we will build entirely from wood. So effectively making it the largest wood district in the world currently. So my role is to bring it all together, really, sort of all the emerging technologies with the sustainability aspects and also the social aspects, because we will have at least 40% of subsidized residential properties there, and we think a lot about social inclusion and how to build better cities in the end. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Hubert?
Yeah, my name is Hubert Romberg. I'm the CEO and owner of the Romberg Group. We are very much in construction and railway. That's what I did the last 20 years, growing into international group in terms of in many countries and continents. But one of my most intensive project is bringing the carbon neutral and sustainable buildings to the world, because I realized just doing a couple of buildings is not making a difference. That's why I founded Kpis, which is a company first constructed building itself. And then what we do is we are a platform that we help partners to, like architects, developers, general contractors, producers, to immediately get the know-how to start right away to build a carbon neutral, energy efficient building. So it's more like a platform business, because that's the only way we can get out with all the information fast enough. So I'm totally curious. I love technology. And on the other hand, it's the combination with mindset. And that's what I always try to bring out to the world. It's about the mindset of sharing the knowledge we all have, and then we can make a real difference. So it's part of our business concept. And yeah, at the moment, we're quite successful expanding to many countries, touchdown in the US. And now we are gathering together with a lot of partners. We want to beat Katera, the collective versus the empire, the rebellion versus the billion empire. So that's a little bit my approach.
Great. Thank you so much for these introductions. Very excited to have you all here. So if we dive into it, we know that the built environment accounts for approximately 40% of energy consumption and about 36% of carbon dioxide emissions in Europe, and around 10% of emissions are directly associated with the construction. So Koen, you have been one of the pioneers of the sustainability approach in the construction and development industry. And how did the market view on sustainability change over time in the past 10, 20 years?
Well, I think there has been a tsunami of change towards us. And I think we're still in that process. For me, the journey started in 2007 when I was invited to a sort of CEO breakfast with Al Gore. And Al Gore got the question, is this real, this global warming thing, or what is happening? He compared it with the dikes breaking in the Netherlands, and I'm based in Amsterdam, and we would be underwater if we wouldn't have dikes. And he said it's something, we have to stand shoulder to shoulder. And so we decided to move into that space. And since then, it's remarkable what has happened. And we are now able to make net zero buildings. Actually, I would say if you make a new build, it's almost, I would say, illegal not to make a net zero building. If we look now at the green deals in the US and then in Europe, it's unbelievable what a huge amount of carrot and stick is coming towards us, where there's a lot of money available to make buildings more sustainable, but also a lot of penalties if you don't move forward. And on the same side, for the first time in I think ever, there is something called PropTech, where there's a lot of new ideas and a lot of new people moving into this space. And back in the day when you were smart, you would work maybe for McKinsey or maybe for Shell or a big bank. You wouldn't go into real estate. When I started in real estate, people were looking at me like, what are you doing? Today, the smartest people in the world are knocking on our door and saying, hey, can we work for you for a couple of years because we have this idea and we want to try this out. And it's amazing how that is changing. Still a lot of work to do. Existing portfolios are let's say, all over the place, still very bad. And now with the big COVID problems that we have around us, we see a lot of people, especially in the commercial real estate space, that are saying, hey, we have to upgrade buildings so that they're also healthy. Well at it. Let's also look at the sustainability and let's see how much we can push towards net zero. That's the positive side. The downside is every building is different. And it's sometimes really hard to make buildings really sustainable, especially also when you want to take the approach of embedded carbon. I'm so happy that Hubert is here. We're building with wood at the moment, and we see a huge upside there. But in practice, it's sometimes also difficult to get it done. And I think we're at the beginning of a very different space in the built environment, and it's super exciting to work at it.
Yeah, that's exciting. It seems like you had to do a lot of educating the market back in the days, but now you're one of the biggest developers in Netherlands with projects in other countries. And what about the German market, Uber? Since you started Romberg and Kpis, did you feel that now sustainability has become more a must to have rather than nice to have?
Well, actually, I can fully support what Cohen said. I mean, now it's really changing, and it's changing so fast that our old industry, the whole fraction industry, it will not be able to move that fast like the demand will go. Now demand is going up so high the next 5 to 10 years because everyone has to be has to buy a green building into his fund. If you're a fund manager, you will ask by the board, hey, how about green investments? Why don't you buy green investments? And they say, where should I get them from? You have to design them, build them, sell them. So that is a huge gap opening up. And this gap is not just for PropTech. This gap will be a huge investment case. If you know where to put your money at the moment, I'm sure that and that's a McKinsey study too, that the demand will go so high, there will not be the capacity in terms of production. You have to produce for the demand. It's unbelievable. Now what we try to do is to help people by delivering technology, the know-how, bringing the know-how to the region, because built is always in the region. If whole Europe wants to change, you have to change in Portugal, in Finland, whatever. So it has to happen there. So you have to bring the know-how there. And we believe sustainability now changes the way the money goes with us too. We are approached by people, they want to, hey, can we give you 500 million because we are sure you make green buildings? So you bring the money and the technology to the developer, because the local developer, you always need the developer, that's the hard thing to do. So, but if you bring the tech, the know-how, plus the money, that's changing everything. So just to give you an example, we have to even scale not just digital platforms, we have to scale the distribution of money, because there's so much money. If you want to distribute trillions, it's not enough. And then I will stop here. It's not enough when politicians say, hey, let's give the money to green transportation, to the rail, or to green development, if there's not the machine there to transport the money and the know-how. And that's something I'm working on, and there's a lot of partners. And I mean, Cohen is the best example, showing what's possible, because others watch. That's market economy. If others watch it, oh, that's working, he's in the front, so others will follow. So this is really now the moment for everyone who wants to invest money. It's like everyone who has money at the moment just has to know where to put it.
Yeah, that's
and one last word, sorry. What will change too is there's a study comparing UK ambition to put the price on the carbon versus the German way to make subsidiaries. It's a total different approach. So they make this research, and they said the UK way is much more effective. So what will come is a market-driven system going up with the carbon. The carbon price will go up, and that will change everything. Just calculate your building with a carbon price of 400 euro per ton, which would be the right price. We calculated it. It's 8% of the investment cost of the building, just to leave you with that number, and that will change everything.
Yeah, that's definitely a very important consideration of the financial incentives and ROI on all this sustainability innovation investments. So maybe one of the questions that is on many people's mind is where sustainability is actually making the most impact in the construction life cycle. And I would like to ask our audience as well to participate. I'm going to launch a quick anonymous poll to see what you think. And the panelists, you can also take part, of course. So the question is where sustainability is making the most impact in the construction life cycle. Is it first at a design and planning phase, or more an on-site construction phase, or at the operation and maintenance phase? If you're using a mobile version of Zoom, you will see a pop-up or on top of your screen a phrase saying poll in progress, and you need to click on it to access the poll. And after you choose the appropriate answer, you can click submit. I see many of you already voted. Thank you so much for that. I'll just wait a couple more seconds for more responses. Thank you so much. I'm going to close the poll now and share the results with all of you right away. So now you can see the results as a pop-up on your screen, or if you're using the mobile version, you need to click on the green phrase saying poll results, and you will see the poll outcome. So as you might see, the results are quite dominated by preference towards design and planning phase. And Lorna, would you like maybe to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. So answering this is probably easier than actually when I had to do the poll, because you had to choose one. And I suppose what I really want to say is that they're all linked together. And I think it's really interesting actually that design and planning has come out on top, because in a sense, I think that's the point, is that actually if you get the design and that planning right in the first place, it will then impact on those other two pieces. So actually, if you design it properly and you plan the process of the construction phase, then you will really have a big impact there. And then the operational phase itself. I think interestingly, so I actually ended up going for the operational phase when forced to choose, because I think the point there is that actually though the operational phase, that you look at the life cycle of the building, it's just such a huge amount of time. So if you get that wrong and you've got a heavy carbon cost on an ongoing operational basis year on year on year, then that really adds up. So that is really important. And I think actually just touching on something that was sort of raised in the previous question is, I think one of the things that's important for us to also do here is look at the definitions of what we're talking about. So when we're talking about net zero, what kind of net zero are we talking about? Are we talking about net zero embodied carbon? Are we talking about net zero in the operational phase of the building? And I think one of the things that I've found really refreshing recently is it's just the speed at which this debate and this conversation is ongoing. Because even just sort of 12 months ago, if I'd said that embedded versus operational, probably, the other panelists would have known, in fact, they definitely would have known what I'm talking about. But I reckon that quite a lot of people in the audience might not have kind of quite been able to say what the difference is. Whereas now, I actually reckon most people in the audience right now do know the difference between embodied and operational. That embodied that happens in that construction phase, and then the operational of that, ongoing operational piece. So I think that that's really important and encouraging, that we can recognize this as it's a complicated debate. There's no one single answer to it. It's lots of different elements. So maybe just sort of one thing just to kind of finish on around looking at these three different elements, and particularly relevant for us at Modomo and what we're doing, is this on-site construction phase and how we do it. Now, it's the design and planning that goes into that, but what we're doing is modular construction. So, it's using modern methods of construction. Now, for us, that's also because we've got this unique proposition that we've got these relocatable units. So, you know, we're unlocking land to help solve the housing crisis that otherwise would be dormant in that cycle. And so they're relocatable. So it needs to be modular because we've got to have a system we can move. But there's really clear benefits to modular construction from a sustainability perspective. You know, if you look at the amount of waste that typically comes out of a building site, you know, that's sort of generally between 10 to 20% of materials going to site end up wasted. Which is just a travesty that it doesn't even ever get used. And actually, from a modular perspective, when that's constructed offsite, you know, the efficiencies are so much higher and you don't get that level of waste. And so, you know, there's real benefits there, you know, along with the ability to that sort of design for deconstruction as well, with that sort of circular economy point of view. We're, in a sense, you call it designing for reconstruction because of the relocatable nature of what we're doing. And there's also an opportunity in modular that you can actually also impact on that third element of the operational phase, and you can roll that out across everything in a much easier way, and it's scalable to make sure that actually, from an operational perspective, you're really thinking about the future operations of the building and ensuring that you're minimizing that point as well.
Great, thank you for that. And Cohen, from a real estate developer's perspective, what is your take on that and the results of the poll?
So I actually thought that we had solved net zero until somebody came up with that idea of taking the material side into account. Because on the energy side, with all the new technologies that are there, and with local additions of geothermal, other things that we can do, we were quite far. If you take into account steel, concrete, and all these other elements, it's a whole different picture, and it becomes a lot harder. And I would say that on our innovation side right now, it's maybe up to 70% of the work that is being done is looking at the material side. We are firm believers in wood. We also would love to have a very different approach of doing construction on site. I sometimes make pictures, and then if you make them in black and white and you show them to people, there is no difference between a construction site in the 50s and what we are seeing in most construction sites today. And there's all this technology out there to do that in a different way. But then, you know, try getting a building permit in a city like Berlin, and you end up again with a sort of gravity that gets us back into a reality that is not open for all that innovation. And even advisors in some cities that are working for us that are really having difficulties in doing things in somewhat of a different way. And we want to take a big salto and redesign all of it, while at the same time having the obligation to finance it with a finance bank, or to go to investors that have certain rules of engagement and that are quite traditional in their approach, and sometimes for good reason. So they're afraid of, you know, taking too much time or doing other things. And so I think that we have to push through, and I think that the difficulties for people that are moving first are going to be there. But solving this material side and solving this waste of resources on the construction side is going to be a game changer that's going to do a lot. And the last thing I want to say, I mentioned that we have a new company that is doing the digital side of things. What we have noticed is that a lot of companies for example, on the office side, are now asking themselves, how many offices do we actually need? And it's scary to see how little information people actually have about the use of their offices. And there are very simple sensors that can basically count how often is a desk used, you know, why are people using the north side different than the south side of the building. What do we know with a little bit of data about air quality in the building, about the energy management. And with that information, there's also a lot of sustainability steps to be made. But also it can be a huge driver of change in way buildings are being used. And I see a lot more happiness going forward for people working in those buildings.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, you mentioned two important points there, Cohen. So the building materials and technology. So two very important factors that can help us pave the way towards more sustainable construction and built environment. So Hubert, I know that in your company, you work with timber as an alternative technology to more polluting cement. And would you like to share a bit with us, are there any trade-offs when you use these materials in terms of maybe cost or quality or construction efficiency?
Yeah, sure. First, I have to say, people think we're a wood company. You know, we make 800 million turnover with 3,000 people in different companies, and a very small part of it is now working consequently with wood. But that's something we believe that will scale. Why is wood a good material? If you go on the material cost, it costs the material itself a little bit more. Yes, but that's not the point. You know, you are much faster to build it at the end. You have less waste in the whole process because you can do prefab. You know, with wood hybrid structures, you shift productivity from the side, like Cohen said. I mean, look at those, it's the same, normally the same way to do it. So, and we still are not there that most of, or a lot of the stuff still happens on site, but it will shift off site. So that's why the costs go down and you have a better health and quality. You know, I made this calculation just to give you this number. We made a calculation for a company building our own new headquarters for 1,000 employees, big new headquarters. And they told me, you're too expensive, like by 2 or 3%. And I said, okay, in our buildings, we have 2 sick leave days less, okay? Because people are healthier in a wooden environment. We have all those statistics with our buildings now in Austria. And so just imagine it's 1,000 euro per employee a year. With 1,000 employees, 1 million euros cost less if you build in wood. So if you ask me about material cost, and probably that was not the answer you expect, wood is the cheapest material. But it's always how you handle it. You know, if you just look at it, we have the problem in Vienna, for instance. A lot of developers, they hesitate because they say it costed me 30% more. There are projects, they really costed 30% more because they did it the old way. You know, they thought, let's do the same design and the same process, just exchange the material. And that's not working. You have to use the material from the beginning in the digital twin and know exactly what's happening with that. So that's very important when you compare the material prices.
Yeah, that ties really nicely to the next point, that the technology, as Cohen mentioned, is really important factor. And maybe Kristofer, as someone who has found few startups in the sustainability space, could you share maybe how tech is helping drive these changes in sustainability in construction?
It comes with a lot of factors. I mean, what you guys said before, every building is different. We always have to go through the local developer to do stuff. We are seeing complex chains here, right? So if it's a new build building, a lot of permits, a lot of planning stuff. So that's where tech starts to come in, help you to do a better planning of integrated systems, because it's not that you're doing a building shell and then you're doing some technology integration like heating and then the ventilation separately, but you need to think it's an integrated model. And that's where tech can help a lot. It helps also in the elements you can put into the buildings in terms of having smarter devices. That's the sensors they can put in the buildings now. It also goes into how you produce the modular construction materials these days, right? So we are seeing a lot of movement towards offsite production, and that means that we can use better technology to build elements that we then ship to construction sites, and we have higher quality elements with less problems afterwards. It helps you find the right piece of hardware, and it's also in the process management, right? If you run all the way through the construction process or the refurbishment to make sure that you end up with a building that's properly documented and that you know how to handle and maintain afterwards. I mean, what we are doing here with ecoworks is we're focused on existing buildings, and when you show up at the construction site to inspect it, there's hardly any documentation because the building was built 50 years ago and there have been numerous changes to it and nobody knows what happened in the building, right? So it's a lot to do, but what I also see that tech adoption is still too slow. I mean, we've been talking about BIM for ages now, and who of the smaller companies really runs BIM systems end to end? So that's one thing where I'm sometimes a bit frustrated that the tech adoption is so slow, because the mid-sized and small-sized construction companies, they've been so happy in the last years, they've been making so much money. There was little pressure on innovation, And that is what I think is slowing the adoption of tech.
Yeah, thank you for that. The tech adoption definitely is a decisive factor. And Jeremy, from the investor's perspective, what changes you're seeing in the contact, and do you see similar challenges from the startups' perspectives?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, when they think of, investment in terms of, the building stock or construction, they automatically think of hardware. But then when you talk to a venture investor, they get pretty scared at that word hardware. But when tech enables sustainability, we see a lot of business models that aren't hardware that are pushing sustainability forward within the industry. So one, good example around that is, having greater control and visibility over your supply chain and how you effectively manage it. Another one could be like a marketplace that's enabling one to enhance the demand supply chain relationship, so that me as a builder or developer or contractor, I've been working with the same set of suppliers for the past 20 years. A marketplace unlocks those relationships. So now I can work with, identify, source, new materials from a whole range of new suppliers that might be more green friendly, that might have more specifications around, this is going to be the carbon impact of my material, and we think you should use this. So from a supply chain perspective, and how we sort of are sourcing everything from the very beginning, there's companies early stage doing remarkably well because they're aligning themselves with existing processes in the industry, not trying to disintermediate them. Also, I think one thing that we're really seeing emerging, and this doesn't only go for construction and PropTech, it goes for a whole host of industries, but carbon accounting. So everything around in our industry, equipment, machinery, supply chain operations, there's companies out there really trying to get a foothold in the market in terms of setting the standard of how we do carbon accounting in the future. So that's not hardware, that's going to be very much, a software focused, company taking playbooks from other industries, but nevertheless, it's going to be something that, potentially can scale quite meaningfully. So when I think about tech and sustainability, it's not necessarily investing in a new material. It can be anything from a marketplace model to, subscription-based to, a combination of both.
Great, they're very interesting. So we see that there are very different challenges along the life cycle and value chain in construction. So the question becomes, how do we bring it all together and align the interests of different parties and manage their challenges? Philip, so I understand that with the Tegel project, I imagine you have to manage all these challenges at once. Would you like to share kind of your view on that?
Thank you. Yes. So I think the point Lorna made earlier was spot on, because in the end, it's all in the planning and design phase, and all the mistakes and the cost explosions that you can witness in the typical building project are basically made in that design phase. Trouble is to find people, if we talk about wood, for instance, to find sufficient offers in the market. So qualified staff, architects who have the experience to work with wood, because what you cannot do is to take a conventional planning and then say, okay, why don't we switch over to wood? It simply doesn't work. Wood is a different material, has different specifications. So you need people who are knowledgeable and have the experience. So one of the greatest challenges we have now is to educate the market, to educate, to make a huge qualification effort, if you like. And that's one part of our project. We call it the Bauhütte 4.0. Bauhütte, sort of the building huts, sort of basically they come from the old cathedrals in the medieval ages, where the best experts came together to work on solutions and to draw plans to make these fantastic constructions possible. And something similar is what we envision here in Berlin with my project. Okay, we want to build the largest residential district from wood in the world. How on earth can we do that? So we want to bring together the best people. We will make an education and training offensive together with the Chamber of Trade and Commerce of the city and of Brandenburg, sort of the area surrounding Berlin, and bring all the different parties together to embark on this journey. At the same time, we are going to collaborate with the best in class. So for about 2 or 3 years, I've been preaching to my team and also to all the people in the city who don't want to listen to us. There are great examples out there. Look at the whole value chain. Look at how Katera, for instance, approached the whole thing. We need open standards. We have to think of it like a Lego principle. Sort of that the bricks all fit together, and then in the next life of the building we can sort of reuse those elements and put them to the next building, so that we can move into a whole cradle to cradle philosophy. And all of a sudden I come across Hubert Romberg, who says, you know, we've got to beat Katara, we have to think of it like Lego. So there are people out there working on that stuff. Or my discussions with Cone, fantastic, sort of how to use sensors and software to make buildings more energy efficient, and to rethink how we work together and how we how we can move into much more efficient use of the built environment. So it will take some time to bring it all together, but you need some heroes and some sort of guiding examples of how it can work. The great thing for all of us here, I mean, this is an amazing panel, and the great thing is something we didn't envision to come so sudden and with such a force, and that's the Green Deal of the European Union. With the carbon taxonomy, at last, finally, we get an instrument that's directing the market forces in the right direction. The right direction is our direction. So, and we shouldn't be humble about that. I think sort of the combined thinking sort of in this group alone is absolutely exemplary, and we must do much more to communicate and to educate. And also work closer together with institutions like the European Commission to establish new standards. Cohen just described how when you apply for a building permission in Berlin, how the reality of the building code in this and in other cities as well sort of brings you down to reality in a very harsh way. And it's extremely frustrating, and I absolutely share that. Yes, I'm working for the city, but I'm not happy with the city. So, but I'm not complaining. We are working on improving it, and as a matter of fact, particularly because this whole wood construction movement is gaining momentum, and is finding a lot of political support, and also in the administration a lot of support. We are now working on the next revision of our building code. It was revised 2019 to make wood construction much easier in principle, but it didn't go far enough. So we are working on the next revision now to go ahead and make it so much easier. Because in the end, and that's the McKinsey guy again in me, we have to tackle systematically the whole value chain. And if the market demands that we build better, but the industry cannot deliver, then we have to act upon it. And we have to penalize the old way of doing things. And this penalty is now coming in form of carbon taxes or the carbon pricing. And I think it's great. I strongly believe in market forces and that it will turn to the better now.
Right. Well, so it means that regulatory incentives work and will work.
Yes.
And will help us get there. And it's great you mentioned Green Deal. So from what we know, the renovation will actually play a big role in this European Green Deal, because obviously European building stock is quite old. So I would like to maybe get your opinion, Kristofer, on that, because as you mentioned, you work with old buildings in Germany and make them more sustainable. So what do you think are the main challenges of this renovation wave that we will have to solve?
Quite a lot, sadly. So it starts with, we talked about the planning phase, right? These old buildings, there's little documentation. So everything you want to know about the building, you have to get through on-site inspections. You have to scan the building, you have to understand it, to send people in to drill holes, test, get probes. So it's harder to get a ground to start from when you do the planning for what you want to do in the future. Then what you also find is that indeed every building is a bit different, even though when they were built after the same model. The windows might be just a few centimeters out of place, and then you can't just use a strict modular system that is rigid, but you have to make a modular system that is adapting to the specific building. So it's a bit more tough to build pre-built elements for those buildings. When you look at what the building technology in these houses is usually like, it's installed on the inside. So all the pipes, all the electricity cables, they're inside your walls, which means if you want to maintain them, you have to open up these walls. But these buildings are inhabited, right? So people live in there, people work in there. So you rip open their walls where they live inside. And it's a lot of stress, a lot of dirt, a lot of resistance. People don't like that your building is being tackled. And so you need to take these tenants into account as well. And you need to make sure that they have a proper transition from their old building to a new building. And then maybe going back to what Philip said, we have a Green Deal, we have carbon pricing coming in. But what's happening these days, the carbon prices are being directly forwarded to the tenant, right? So if you are renting out an apartment in Germany and it's gas fired, the carbon price that comes in, it ends up on your energy bill, and not the home owner needs to be charged for it, but the tenant itself. And especially if it's in socially or in economically problematic dwellings where you have people living who are already spending all of their money on living, housing, and it becomes even tougher because the spread we see from the building owner profiting from the renovation part being done in the building, whereas the inhabitant who is suffering from the higher rent, it's an issue. So yeah, existing buildings, I guess, are a bit harder to tackle there than the new built ones.
Yes. Yeah, that's very interesting. And Lorna, would you like maybe to share your experience of the UK renovation?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's really great to hear from Kristofer. And I think we need to recognise in the UK we've got an even bigger issue. So I think if there's a sort of direct stat that compares the UK average housing stock to the German housing stock, and UK homes are 3 times more inefficient than German homes. So we really need to be addressing that. And, I mean, Modomo, it's about sort of unlocking land and building new homes in the way that we're doing it, but sort of probably more with my UK Green Building Council hat on, this is something that, they're really advocating for real sort of actual government intervention on, actually. And I think, this is something where there is an opportunity to look at actually how do we take the moment that we're in now with COVID and kind of build off the back of that and use it as an opportunity to retrofit. Social housing sort of leading the way could play a big part in that, and actually to some of the points that Kristofer was making, trying to improve energy efficiency in the existing housing stock actually can be very labor intensive, and it as you're saying, it's difficult to apply sometimes some of those really smart tech solutions which we need for all the new buildings that we've been talking about and then Jeremy was touching on, but for that existing housing stock is lent. So that's also from an employment perspective and sort of rebuild from an economic perspective, there are real opportunities there. So it's a huge challenge, and we do really need to sort of come together to address it.
Yeah, that's really important point. And maybe Jeremy, I know you have doing some research on the CO2 emissions and European building stock. Would you like to comment on that?
Sure. So Europe is quite unique because when we compare it to Asia, the building stock sticks around for 3 times as long. Certain parts of Asia, when we compare it to the U.S., it's 2 times on average. And so when we're discussing primary versus secondary, of course we have new builds happening in Europe, but the secondary stock is here to stay for a very long time. Now, this is also coupled with the fact that there's this skilled labor shortage And so when we put all this together, it doesn't necessarily spell doom. I actually see a lot of opportunity. And when I compare sort of what we've been seeing in the US over the past 18 months, there's been an explosion in sort of renovation tech to the point that it's a red ocean or a very saturated market where companies have received a lot of funding to specifically go after interior outfittings and even to some extent sort of building extensions. And that is still very much, I think, open in Europe in terms, or a blue ocean, where it's not as saturated yet as it is in the US. So I think, you know, our thesis or my personal thesis, and also to discuss with my colleagues, is that we're going to see even more sort of renovation tech companies emerge in the next 18 months in Europe, sort of following that wave that we've seen in the US. And that's really going after the fact that, number one, the COVID situation, of course, and people wanting to spend more money on, you know, the existing home that they're living in rather than, you know, something new. But then number two, it's just also this dynamic around, you know, the building stock's just going to be sticking around for a hell of a lot longer. And so investment in it is, you know, going to obviously follow.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And maybe I would like to ask another question to our audience to see what they think. This time about what actually drives the growth of sustainable construction. Is it the regulatory requirements or commercial benefits or environmental and social responsibility? Let me just 1 second until I launch the poll, and panelists as well, you can of course vote as well. Would be curious to see what our audience thinks today and what is the actual driver behind the industry growth and the incentive to switch from traditional to sustainable construction. I'll give you a few more seconds to vote. We have more than 50% of people who already voted. Okay, we have the majority who already voted. I will share the results now with everyone. So you can see that regulatory requirements and environmental and social responsibility are tied at 40%. Would anyone from the panelists like to comment on that?
Yeah, exactly. I think it all comes together, right? The main reason how it all started is environmental and social responsibility, and the policymakers took it into regulatory requirements that is now going to lead to better commercial benefits.
Yeah. I guess maybe
can I add something to it? What I find interesting is that very often you see in an industry that there's a couple of companies that are starting to move. Then the government sees that and says, oh wow, there's more possible. What we're now seeing in the Netherlands is that you're not allowed to rent out office space if you don't have an energy label C. So D, E, and F are, as of next year, not allowed anymore. The banks won't finance that kind of real estate anymore because they know that you can't have the income from that real estate. And now suddenly there's a explosion of retrofitting going on, where companies just have to act. And it's interesting to see the dynamic of these different things. That's why we are such a huge fan of the Green Deal, that will push a lot of countries in the right direction, and banks will follow, and then real estate owners will follow as well.
Yes, thank you for that. I guess one of the challenges that we see is actually lies in the fact that we don't necessarily know or agree on how to measure sustainability. It seems like this is one of the key questions that needs to be solved if we want to move all in the right direction. So Lorna, you mentioned you're on the UK Green Building Council. So what are kind of the practical considerations or recommendations you could share with the audience today to get there, to have a roadmap to get to this net zero?
Yeah, so probably sort of two parts there, just around the kind of sort of measuring and then that practical roadmap. I think the practical roadmap, and I think this is one of the things I touched on earlier, is there's a real recognition that there's an urgency around how we do this now. And actually, so I actually would say, I think the biggest thing that we can do is collaborate and actually work together to do this. Like, we don't have time for everybody to go off on their own and, pick up their solutions and sort of drive it forward for a few years and, then other people slowly pick it up. We really need to share along the way. And I think in a sense, actually, that's probably the most powerful thing we can do. And, this kind of thing is really important for us to be, different people to be sharing their experiences and to be interacting, with the community as a whole. And one of the interesting things that, so the World Green Building Council, they have launched the net zero carbon buildings commitment. And one of the interesting things about that is, so there's two parts to that. So one is, if you sign up to that all assets under your direct control must be net zero operational by 2030. So that's fine. And I imagine kind of a few people on the panel could easily sign up to that. But then the second bit that you have to sign up to is that you have to advocate for all buildings across the whole industry to be net zero operational by 2050. So there's an advocacy piece there as well. So I think that, there is a piece here around us, it's working together, it's collaborating, advocating. And I do think that actually, as an industry, that's not something that we've traditionally been particularly strong at. And I think, was it somebody in one of the questions or sort of answers that, is sometimes, it can be sort of adversarial in some ways, and people, they don't have a natural tendency to share. So I think that's one of the really big things that we need to try and take away, because it's in all of our benefits to get this right. We have to get this right. Nobody's going to win if we don't. So we do need to work together to make it happen.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And maybe Cohen, so we know that some of your buildings are at the forefront of the green label certifications. So is there any other way how you also measure sustainability, both from embedded carbon and operational energy perspective?
I think that there are pretty good systems out there at the moment, and we also see that they develop quite rapidly. We in the Netherlands use BREEAM, and there's also the British system that's doing very well. I think that the difficulty we see at the moment is that our clients also want to have smart buildings and also want to have healthy buildings. And what we don't have at the moment is a sort of holistic system where all these different elements come together. And so that's something that we have to work on. Maybe it doesn't matter so much, and maybe even the extremely simple method that they use in the Netherlands with this energy label A, B, C, D, etc., which doesn't capture a lot of things that we're all working on. But maybe that's already a great step for everybody to start to move forward. And I think that what would really help me and my company is that building code would be universal in Europe. And we had the opportunity at the World Economic Forum to talk to Frans Timmermans about the Green Deal. And I said, please, if building with CRE, I see Hubert laughing, if that is allowed in Amsterdam because it's safe from a fire department, and it's also allowed in Hamburg, then let it also be allowed in Berlin, because that would make life so much easier. But in Germany, you have TÜV Nord and TÜV Süd, and they have a different way of defining fire and what it does. And so even more important than these measures of getting sustainability right would be to make building code more efficient, easier, and if there's one place where Europe could really make a difference, it would. And by the way, I would love to have the UK part of Europe again on this front to bring that all together. And yeah, I will remember that I was working with Signify Lighting, and we used that to digitalize our buildings first, but we had the right sensoring. Then we went to Boston, and Boston, it's such a very forward-looking city. And then in Boston, we were not allowed to use that light because it was not yet through the approval processes there. When it got through the approval processes, the unions wouldn't do it because sensoring, light, and the ceiling elements were done by different part of the construction industry. And if they would work together, that would be a problem in the union, because then they had to talk to each other and define what the pricing should be. And there's so many, what I said about this gravity of some of these issues, and I don't want to be a complainer because there are solutions for all these things, But if I could talk to the governmental side, I would say building code, if we harmonize that, we can really scale things up a lot quicker.
Hubert, it seems like you want to add something to that.
Well, actually, that's exactly the point, because I'm in the World Resource Forum sometime as a speaker and talking to politicians, and they say exactly what Cohen said. We have to have new technology for a greener world. And I always say, just accept each other's technology. The future is about sharing the know-how and trusting each other. If a building burns the same way in Hamburg than in Vienna, physics is the same. You know, I made one example. I had a talk in Hamburg. They were talking about Hafen City, everything going in wood and whatever, and then they were talking about those obstacles, and I said, that's because the obstacle is Hamburg does not trust Vienna. Why don't you trust Viennese people? And then a politician said, no, we love the Viennese people, we have partnerships, whatever. But why don't you believe them that they built 84 meters high with wood, that it's not working in Hamburg? What's the problem? And that's exactly the point. And we should really, and from an investment case too, you know, it's like in rail business where you have all these boundaries between countries, you know. If you look as an investor, look at something which will be in a space where the boundaries will be lowered between all those codes, there the explosion will happen, okay? So, because probably some potential investors in PropTech, Contech, whatever are watching. I mean, that's where it's happening. And I'd love to have this discussion, because we can make a difference if we send the same message to all our politicians, like Cohen said. So I fully support that. Thank you.
Yeah, so it seems like collaborating together and working towards the universal approach, universal standards really could help us get there. And we talked a lot about environmental sustainability. And I would also like to touch a bit the part of social responsibility and economics. So how do you also integrate the assessment of the impact on communities and residents? Maybe Philip, you could share your experience, because your project really affects all areas of life.
Sorry? In principle, yes, it does affect all. But Hubert is absolutely spot on, and it's the red tape, and it's sort of not accepting standards that have been proven in other geographies. So the social acceptance is there. Sort of everybody, we get so many requests of families and individuals who'd love to build and to live in the new district that we are currently planning. We've presented our plans in public, of course. The public opinion is much further than the regulatory reality, and if we want to move ahead, it's on two levels. I think it's the regulatory framework, and it's making our products bankable. Sort of we haven't talked much about finance on this panel yet, but in the end, it's all about project financing. And sorry, I'm a bit evading your question, because I think the main issues are elsewhere. And if you look at the total cost of ownership of a building, there the good old 80-20 rule applies. So 20% roughly go into sort of capex, into building the house, and 80% go into operations. And the trouble is that the property development and property usage fall apart in most cases. So the owner and the operator are not the same as the guys who develop the building, and that's something that's got to stop, because then then you have an incentive to use better materials, to use to create healthier buildings, because you know exactly, like Hubert said as well, HR is in the end much more expensive than the investment in your building. So, but coming back to social acceptance, I think one of the most important things is, as a public entity, we do not think so much about the buildings that will be predominantly built by other people, sort of our communal building societies and so forth. But we think much more about the public space, and there the whole tragedy continues, if you like. So we have adopted a rather radical approach, and we have banned cars from the inside. We have redesigned street space into living space. We have redesigned the whole water system, so as a sponge city concept, so that we keep all the rainwater in the district. We have worked on animal-aided design, so that the biodiversity is greater once we finish the project than it is currently, where it's just a meadow, you know. And we've developed a new energy system that's extremely sustainable. So in the end, I think we have to lead by example. We have to show as a city that we can and will act upon what's necessary. And also that we invite the private sector to contribute as good as they can. And if it succeeds, it will scale and it will make the world a better place.
Yeah, that's
and people love it. The response is amazing.
Great, thank you, Philip. Yeah, that's a very important point about aligning all these interests and incentives together, especially financial ones. And Lorna, I know you're also doing a lot of work on measuring the social impact and tackling the housing crisis with your experience.
Yeah, firstly, thanks for that, Philip. It's really inspiring to hear some of what you're doing. And I think, you know, it just feeds into that actually we do need to look at this on a holistic basis. And, you know, for us, you know, we're purpose-led in what we're doing, and our purpose is to tackle the housing crisis. And that is a social problem that we are trying to solve. And so that is something that, you know, we are very much looking at, is actually how do we measure our impact? And so, you know, we've done quite a lot of work on that. And so we've got a set of impact metrics in place, the social impact metrics there and environmental impact metrics. And you know, I do think, you know, we can recognize there is a challenge with measuring that social impact, because it's quite individual depending on what's going on. And I imagine if Philip and I were to try and take exactly the same social impact metrics on his project and for our project, it's really difficult to align those to be exactly the same. So we've worked with a company called The Good Economy, who've been great to develop those metrics for us. And so we're doing that, and we've got to hit those metrics to take something through investment committee, for example, trying to do that. And around things like the additionality of homes that we're providing to an area specific to us and our business model, the inclusivity of communities, that kind of thing, and really trying to have a robust process around that. I think we are seeing this move much more to the mainstream, this recognition that you need to look at all these different elements. And you know, one of the things that we're also doing is we're on the journey to become a B Corp organization. And what I really love about the B Corp is it really is a movement, you know, and I'm sure most people have heard of it, but for those that haven't, you know, B Corps it's a bit like it's a sort of flagship kind of badge that you get to show that you are a new kind of business, and it's balancing purpose and profit, where you're legally required to consider the impact of your decisions on all stakeholders. And I think, you know, that is now much more recognized as a way to do business. And, you know, you've seen that with, you know, the American Roundtable. They shifted, you know, it's not just for their investors, actually, it's for the wider stakeholders that they've got a duty of care. And that financing point, that links into the financing point. So part of the reason that's also important to us to demonstrate that is, you know, as we grow and as we scale, you know, we're talking to impact investors around that. And you're seeing, you know, a lot more of that and it becoming important to everybody. So yeah, I mean, I suppose in summary, that the social impact is totally critical, and it's just integral to what we're doing. And I think Kristofer answered it in one of the questions we had, that actually, you know, addressing that social impact will automatically in some cases be addressing that environmental impact and vice versa, and you get positive benefits from both.
Great, thank you for that, Lorna. You mentioned impact investing, and I would like to ask the last question before we start taking the audience questions to Jeremy and Kristofer from the VC perspective. So how do you balance the ESG impact of the contact PropTech businesses and financial returns?
It totally goes in line. I don't think you have to balance it. What we see these days that might even be a bit of risk of a bubble we're into, is that everything ESG is running at very high valuations. We see SPACs out of nowhere buying sustainable transportation companies and stuff, right? So there is a lot of money going into that sector, and there's a lot of in terms of investment, but there's also, if you look at what's happening in the trickle-down effect from the big funds, we talked about it earlier, like the fund managers will tell the companies that we have to have a certain part of your portfolio being green and sustainable. And that means there's going to be such a high demand for green assets that everything that helps providing these assets will be a very interesting business in the next years to come. Even to the point that I would say it's risky to overheat to some extent at some point. So that's the only downside I see. But generally, I would say, Jeremy, I guess you would agree, it's a very good business opportunity to be ESG positive.
Yeah, and I would say too, I think maybe a few years ago, there was a little hesitation, but what's been able to be demonstrated is the fact that you can tie your sustainability KPIs to overall business performance. So for example, we were talking about, the need to reduce waste on site. If you can better predict, the exact kind of materials that you're going to need, in turn, you're going to be reducing the overall project cost or the cost that the, contractors/developers going to incur. And so being able to demonstrate, I think it's been a more of a matter of time being able to demonstrate ESG being tied to, key performance metrics. And I think it's on its way to being validated when we get into the growth stage as well too, with many of these companies.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We had covered so many different topics today, and I would like to start taking audience questions. So we have already several questions coming in, and please don't hesitate to type it in the Q&A section of Zoom. So maybe one of the first questions I would like to ask anyone, please feel free to take that. So if you had the money, where would you invest in the value chain to help get the industry moving?
I already wrote one of the possible answers, because obviously demand is growing, but the know-how is not there. We are going not just into more sustainable, we're going into more prefab. So we have a different supply chain in the future. So that's something normally is a very risky investment, to go with big capex in a production facility and then wait if the market is coming normally. Now things are different because the market is changing and we have to build up production capacity, but in certain probably network effect, like the same platform business I was talking before. So I would looking for investing, buying probably existing companies, changing the path, or starting new production facilities, which are quite modular and easy to duplicate and grow. So that's something I think, following the demand of buildings and components and building up behind that the production capacity and logistic would be one thing I would look at.
Great, thank you for that. So we have a question for Kristofer. So how does a small player can be effective in the space? Talk about ecoworks.
Maybe that also answers the next question on whether or not you're too young with 30 years to do something with impact. Start small, start a business that does something that can have a potential impact, and then find ways how to scale it. So the idea behind ecoworks is not that we are trying to be the one company refurbishing all European building stock. It's just going to work. We're taking a position more like Uber, for example, does. Like, what can we do in terms of providing an infrastructure, develop the technology, develop the planning process, and then make it available to others so they can build these materials, build these facade elements and the technology elements, use our planning tools, and then scale it up themselves. Because construction inherently is, and the same for refurbishment, is a work being done on the ground at a specific location. We can't be everywhere as a small company, but we can be the player, even at young ages, that drives in the change and gives opportunity to others who want to use the technology.
can I add to that as well? And I think, yeah, I mean, that question, am I too young to make a difference? Definitely not. Yeah, I mean, you know, and I think, as I've said, everybody has got to contribute to this here. And actually, it's really got to be this sort of collective effort. So it needs to be kind of like leaders at the top, right through to, you know, kind of graduates or, you know, people who are kind of just entering, and across sort of lots of different ways. So you know, from a startup entrepreneurial perspective, then yeah, you need to actually kind of, you know, try and put some of your ideas into practice. But I think also recognizing that this is, I think, quite a unique moment in time where people are ready to listen and people know that they need to change. So take advantage of that. So, you know, if you're in a bigger corporate or that sort of world, also like now is the time when your senior leaders will listen to you. And actually, if you were to reach out to them and some of those leaders who are perhaps in, you know, more influential positions, then they would be ready to listen to you and your views. And so actually, I think, you know, really take advantage of that moment and actually your position within this. And there's also something here around, you know, and this is perhaps a wider kind of issue around the climate crisis, but there's generational injustices here, you know, that actually it's the next generation who are going to suffer the most from what happens through climate change. So make your voice heard in it. I would just really advocate that. And from a sort of personal perspective, you know, I'm a big fan of networking and getting to know other people and staying in touch with people. So there's that, you know, that question around how do you do that? Get involved with industry bodies. You know, in the UK, there's the UK Green Building Council, but there's plenty of others. And actually at the moment, so sustainability and social impact, they're all really hot topics and there's loads going on. So just get involved with that. And, you know, people that you know that are involved in it, ask them. And you know, I run a networking group called Peer 20, and you know, it's been running for years, but just recently, anything that we do around climate change, people are desperate to be talking about it and sustainability. Like everybody wants to know, and we've got one next week, and they're sort of quite exclusive events where we normally only have 20 people, and we've never had this before. Where already we've got to be planning another one because we've just like oversubscribed in a way that just doesn't happen normally. So yeah, so I would just say like get talking, get networking, get involved in your industry bodies. Talk to the senior leaders. You know, this is a moment that we can all make a difference. So just believe in the power that you have to make a difference.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And it actually ties nicely to the next question of how can VCs and real estate work closer together to support the growth of ESG-centric ventures to help us get to carbon zero. So if anyone would like to take the question, I guess also important consideration is is it going to be a lot of individual initiatives, like, for example, Lorna, you mentioned some of the networking groups, or should it be more on the industry level, something more formalized and structured so that we can all agree on some industry standards?
I have a very short one, is provide pilots. So if you own real estate, make sure that it's being used to test new processes, new technologies with small companies, and be bold, be daring, trust that these projects, they will be chaotic. You will have problems. They will run costs higher than you expected when you do it with small startups, but you will on both sides learn a lot from it.
And I would say as a VC, really, you know, setting that narrative from the very beginning with your portfolio, especially if it's not a focus at the get-go at time of investment. And even as a fund manager, making that a core part of, you know, your thesis in some form or fashion.
Right, thank you for that. So then we have next couple of questions. I think they're more targeting Cohen. What kind of sensors do you use for desk occupancy? And another question about IoT devices that you believe must be used to collect and monitor ESG data.
So on the censoring front, there's so much happening that it's difficult to say what we use because we're sort of in a dynamic process of doing things. The difficulty that we have is that we basically have two setups. One is our own buildings that we call edge buildings. In our edge buildings, we have a sort of standardized ceiling system with a lighting system and LED all included in the setup. And so, and we sell them what we call IoT enabled buildings. And then we have this digital company that sort of comes in and says, hey, for very little money, we can actually connect to the data coming out of that and making sure that that you get information and yeah, some real help in making that building function better. Then you come to the level of an existing building. This is where the huge market is, of course, because all these buildings are out there already. One of the first projects that we did is that we got a phone call from the foreign ministry in the Netherlands that said, hey, we have an embassy in Delhi, and they are afraid that the air quality inside is as bad as the air quality that is outside. Can you measure that? We just took a couple of sensors, we sent them to Delhi, they put them on the wall, and the next day, we could tell them that half the building was pretty okay and half the building was really, really bad, even worse than outside. Turned out that the filters in the air conditioning were somewhat messed up, etc., etc. And it's this basic level of, and a CO2 sensor is and these sensors that can measure these particles. They are very cheap. There's all kinds of companies from let's say China to Germany to the US that make them. That can do that. We found out, and this is also now done in the US by MIT, that if you have a CO2 meter, that the connection between the outcome there and the outcome of having very expensive virus scanners they're very similar. And so if you measure CO2, basically you have a pretty good picture in a meeting room. Whether the air quality is good enough to function, also with the effect of having the danger of viruses. And so it's interesting how cheap it is. There's a couple of questions around privacy there. We know that WeWork started to experiment with cameras, and they had the ability, instead of having sensors and seeing how many people are sitting on what desk, you have a camera, and then you have let's say a smart system that can recognize people, that can recognize movement, that can see what is empty and what is used. And that is a very cheap and effective way of doing things. However, the face recognition capabilities of these cameras are such that right away you can also follow somebody through the building. You can see who talks to whom, how long, etc. We stayed away from that. However, in the Netherlands, people are pretty relaxed about it. We know in Germany, it's a very sensitive topic. And so we still have to figure out, and we tend to be very careful when it comes to these kinds of topics. And we know that regulation also is going to get tougher on that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And Philip, would you like to maybe add how you approach this IoT sensors in the Tiggle project?
In a way you would probably not expect. We are building a new urban data hub ourselves as a city. So I have a few programmers now in my team, and we are going to establish open standards that have privacy protection at the core, if you like. And we are collaborating with industry. So we are working together with Microsoft, with Siemens, but it's according to our specifications. So we are at the core, sort of the core level, and it's got to be open data, urban data, and open source. Also, we have developed our own humble lampposts, so modular lamps. They host the charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. They have all the optical and sensor infrastructure that you could imagine, 5G prepared, Wi-Fi, etc., etc. And they also emit light, of course. And we designed them about 4 or 5 years ago because we couldn't find what we wanted on the market. The market was sort of being flooded with proprietary shitty systems. And what we want is open systems. So with our IoT strategy, when you want to plug in sensors, basically, you can just plug them into our lampposts. So you ask for permission, and you can use an USB hub. Electricity is in there, fiber connection is in there. So the lampposts are basically our IoT hubs, and in the end, it's a mesh grid. So our approach was basically, no, we do not have to reinvent the wheel, but we have to take control or regain control over core assets, and the rest can be left to other parties, so that we can make sure that data privacy is at the very core of it, and that every citizen can be sleep calm that no personal information will ever be processed over these networks that we control. So that's our approach.
Yeah, that actually ties nicely to the next question that our audience asks is whether you believe that data privacy laws are an impediment for creating more sustainable and operating real estate. And I guess kind of you.
Yes, yes and no. I think the way data privacy is practiced today, the regulatory framework is completely hard. It's very important. So in principle, it's correct. The way it's done is stupid, I think. So we have to engage in the public discourse about where we want to go with data privacy, and how we make sure in future that personal data is protected in a way that it cannot be technically not be abused by third parties, but that you can share and contribute to collaborative systems if you choose so. And of course, in the end, it's got to be blockchain based, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to open technology discourse. It's more a philosophical question, sort of how you, whether you perceive technology as inherently beneficial or a threat. And I think it's inherently beneficial, but I want to make sure that those who feel threatened don't have a reason to be threatened.
Great, thank you for that. So another question is about the shortage of skilled workers. So we know that one of the issues is that we will face the shortage of skilled workers, especially for the green construction. How big do you see this as an issue and how we can solve that?
Is that to me or to the panel?
Anyone who is happy to take the question.
Our whole company evolves around that. I mean, we're doing prefabrication because we said we can't have enough skilled workers on the ground to increase the refurbishment rate from what we see 0.8% in Germany these days to the required 3-4%. We don't have the people, right? So we need technology to change that. And it's a tough one because the company I started before was Thermondo, and when we started rolling it out, people also got afraid that we're going to take a lot of things away from the installer, like the usual mom and pop shop there, where the master craftsman goes out and does the sales pitch themselves, where they do the bookkeeping themselves and stuff. So they were afraid to be reduced to a instructionalized installing person and not be an entrepreneur themselves anymore. And with the structure of small companies out there that we see, this is a danger that they usually feel when they hear about prefabrication, like, oh, there's this big corporation coming in and shipping materials, and I only have to drill the holes and bolt the nuts here. So it's a lot of communication involved as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd just add to that I think, we know that training and development is going to be key to this, and I think that the industry needs to recognize that needs to be a sort of an ongoing sort of really important part of everything that we're doing, because things are changing so quickly as well. You could have been kind of very much up to date with everything sort of even just 12 months ago, and already that's going to be pretty out of date, and there's going to be loads of new solutions and ways of doing things that are coming on board. So I think just a recognition across the industry that we need to make sure that we're training our people and we're training our workforce very actively on an ongoing basis, and keep doing that. And more than anything, we also know that that's going to mean you've got a more engaged workforce, and you've got a workforce who's going to be able to deliver better for you as well.
I would like to add that why it's so important to go into this prefab, because out of the digital twin we can calculate much better what's gonna happen, the whole value chain. But why it's so important, we lost the last 5 years 20% of all skilled people, our industry. That's one thing. Second, new people coming in the industry are less skilled. Okay, in earlier days, the designer or the architect did some drawings on the window, and there was a good handwerker. He knows what to do. Okay, there's a drawing, but I know how to do. Okay, so quality is going down. That's a problem. Second, things are changing so fast in the industry, so you have still the people that are still in the industry, but things change so fast that they cannot cope with that. So this is a problem. At the same time, demand is growing. So capacity is going down, demand is growing. So it has to be a solution which is gives the chance more people getting into the working process, like more women in our industry, because we have workshops, off-site production, which have workplaces which much better for a bigger a range of people, you know, to work there. Even slightly handicapped people can work in those environments. So it's a lot of momentum in the whole thing, why it will go there. And the old industry will stay the old industry in kind of infrastructure. So everything which is connected to the ground and cannot be shifted to offsite, but what can be shifted will be shifted. It's like with digitization.
Can I just build on that back again? Is that I think you've actually sort of touched on something that we've not really kind of discussed today, but I do think is really important. But is that diversity issue actually, and I think that's diversity in its broadest sense. So yes, gender diversity, but ethnic diversity, and we need all sorts of people from different backgrounds to be addressing this. And I think we know as an industry that this is really important, but for all sorts of reasons. And I think, but particularly for sustainability, we need the brightest minds, and they're going to come from lots of different areas. And also, it's that kind of challenging different types of thinking and being open to that. So, I think we have to, on that, sort of double down on all of our efforts around it to be really trying to improve the diversity across the whole industry.
Yeah, thank you, Lorna. I think that's a great way to put it, and a really great comment to kind of conclude our discussion. Is anyone would like to add anything from among the panelists on that point, or anything else before we conclude?
Just one thing. With Cree, we have like 13 different nations and 60% women in our company.
Impressive. Good job. Well, if not, thank you all so much for your great insights. It's been a very interesting, exciting conversation. I'm glad that we all could have been here, and thank you so much to the audience for participating and for asking great questions. Please stay tuned for our next edition of PropTech Connect. And I guess the main takeaway today is really we need to collaborate all together and work together towards the brighter, sustainable future. And thank you all so much for being here. And we will share with you the recording and the contacts of the panelists that were here today.
Thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.